Hello and welcome to the Print Softcover, our digital avenue for launching select nonfiction books. Today, we will be launching Swadeshi Steam by A.R. Venkatachalapati, which looks at V.O. Chidambaram Pillai and the battle against the British Maritime Empire. The book, published by Penguin India, is a fascinating tale that looks at a very interesting time in the larger context of the freedom movement in India and looks at a very specific port town in Tamil Nadu, the town of Tuticorin, at the height of the Swadeshi movement. We have with us today the author of the book, A.R. Venkatachalapati, who is a Tamil writer, a historian, and a professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai. Good day and welcome to the Print, sir.
Hi, thank you very much, Keshav.
Sir, I just wanted to, the first question is your book looks at the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company, and not many people know or understand the sort of different competitions, especially in the economic realm, that Indians faced at the height of the British Raj, the early 20th century. And you've picked on a very specific company, the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company, that existed for about 2.5 years in the port town of Tuticorin, or modern day Toothukudi, in Tamil Nadu, or the then Madras Presidency. So, my question to you, sir, and for the larger audience, is why the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company? What makes this special? Because we have, through history and in your book itself, you make mentions of multiple steamers run by Indians, including families like the Tatas, the Tagores, right? But you've chosen the Swadeshi company. Why, sir?
Two reasons, Keshav. Firstly, Chidambaram Pillai, VOC, as he is called in Tamil Nadu, or in Tamil VOC, he is a very big hero in Tamil. And I'm sure this book will tell you why he is such a big hero. Unfortunately, outside Tamil Nadu, hardly anything is known about VOC or even the larger freedom struggle, the various aspects of the freedom struggle in Tamil Nadu. So that is the first story, the first gap that I seek to redress. That is number one. Secondly, the nature of this company. Yes, there were earlier efforts. India, of course, as we know, was a maritime power. Navigation was a very important part of ancient India, even though the Mughal Empire was the biggest weakness of the Mughal Empire was that it was a terrestrial empire and not a maritime or naval empire. So when the British came, the Europeans, they ruled the seas. And there was no challenge from the colonized people. In India itself, there were sporadic efforts. Even by 1850s, there were some Parsi merchants. We know that Parsi merchants were part of the opium war, opium trade. And in Bengal itself, there were sporadic efforts starting native steaming companies. A very good example was the poet Rabindranath Tagore's elder brother. But the big difference between those companies and V.O. Chidambaram Pillai's Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company, the name itself tells you all. It is a Swadeshi company. It had politics written on its sleeves. The company shouted from the rooftops that this was a political venture. We are here not to run a company and make money, but we want to re-establish the greatness of Indian civilization. And we want to show the imperial powers, the colonial powers, especially the British, their place. So that was the time when the British India Steam Navigation Company and the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company ruled the seas. So the essential aspect of Chidambaram Pillai's Steam Navigation Company was it was a political move. It was part of India's anti-colonial struggle. It was part of India's freedom movement.
In your answer, you mentioned the position of the British India Steam Navigation Company, the BI, and the Peninsula and Oriental Company, and later the Asiatic Navigation Company, all run by Britishers, right? And Here, rather, it was a set of merchants from a small town of Tuticorin with about 40,000 people, trying to start its own steam navigation company. So my question is two-part. One, what were the challenges which led to this merchant syndicate, which then later formed a joint stock company, to sort of start their own merchant vessel, which focused on cargo and freight rather than solely passenger travel? And second, what were the external challenges they faced once the company was set up? Because these European companies, these British maritime empire, as everyone calls it, would not want to give space to a Swadeshi company. So, in that sense, what were the challenges they faced from their competition, as well as, I imagine, the state apparatus, which would want to promote the interests of Britain over local Indians? So that is my question, sir.
Okay. Yes. No, I think we have to go a little bit backward. The biggest challenges was that, how this idea was first conceived, that somebody deep down south in a small port town would even have this audacious plan of taking on the might of the uh, British behemoths, and knowing very well that they were not alone, that they were backed by the colonial state. So to this question, I am still fumbling for answers, because no rational person would launch on this. But that is where the heroism of VOC comes in. And I believe that the origins of it comes from the late 19th century Indian nationalists like Dadabhai Naoroji, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, and others who conceived this idea of economic nationalism, that colonialism was primarily an economic project, and that had to be undermined if India was to become free. VOC was certainly familiar with the ideas of these great thinkers, and he was also a strong supporter, in fact, the southern lieutenant of Lokmanya Tilak. So politics was very much politics in the sense of anti-colonial Indian nationalist politics was in the very DNA of this company. So this was the first. So yes, Tuticorin was a small place with a population of 40,000. But the port itself was not a small port. There are different assessments. Either it was the fourth largest or the fifth largest port in India, Indian subcontinent. So this would also include Karachi. It's probably the fifth largest port there. So it was a big port. And it was a very important point in the Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean circuit. As you mentioned, cargo, indentured labor, and passengers. So in the first instance, the immediate proximate trigger for the launching of the company was the fact that this British steam navigation companies, the local port authorities, they were all whites, they were Europeans. So this their attitude to Indians was laced with racism. So it was not just it was a double whammy. You get exploited economically, and also you get insulted in the process. So in the context of the Swadeshi movement, following the partition of Bengal and the rise of mass nationalist politics, they decide that the British have to be challenged, and this is where VOC comes up with this plan. Originally, it is from Tuticorin traders, but let us not forget that when it became a company, shareholders came from all over from India. Firstly, the company had branches in Colombo, Bombay, Calcutta. The shareholders came from all over South India, Colombo, Calcutta, and Bombay Presidency. So even though it functioned from one corner, right from the beginning, the company and its leader, V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, had an expansive view of what the company should do. The other challenges, if I may continue, was that first, the two behemoths, especially British India Steam Navigation Company, had one of the largest fleets in the whole world. You refer to the term monopoly and monopolistic. But the very ironical thing is that the state did not recognize monopoly or monopolistic practices. It was a free run. The mighty could enforce whatever rate they did. The modern day idea of restricting monopoly practices, the modern day idea of of being opposed to cartels, antitrust legislation, none of these things existed. And also the concept of the infant industry, that in a nation, if there was an infant industry, that was a newly coming up industry, the state should provide protection. None of these concepts existed. In fact, the British, in the name of laissez-faire, in the name of free trade, actually openly, brazenly, shamelessly, unethically, and immorally supported the British companies, and it permitted a free hand to the local administration to do whatever it wanted. So the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company's touts, agents, canvassers were all, their work was impeded. The people who collected shares for the company, they were shadowed. So an interesting part of this book is that the much of the data that I have collected comes from CID reports. Why would a CID police go after a business company? Precisely because it was not a business company. It was a political company. So that was the interesting aspect. So each and every member of the Swadeshi company was shadowed by policemen, and Chidambaram Pillai VOC was the key figure, and every activity of his was recorded.
Right, sir. And you mentioned in your book, based on the CID reports, that there was this strong belief, at least in the administration to a certain point, that there is no fear of the Swadeshi movement actually being extremely strong in the presidency in Madras presidency. Right, there's this idea that I think in one of your early chapters you actually brought out the quote of what they were thinking of, how the well-to-do people really don't have any interest in the sort of nationalistic feelings, except for the town of Tuticorin. Right, and I think there are other reports, but then this is not true, and you sort of shadow this to a breaking point, which we then see VOC arrested, put into jail for sedition, which he remained for 4 years. So, from your understanding of the data and the sort of archival material, what led to the assassination of a ICS officer in the town of Tuticorin? What were the different factors in play that sort of led to that breaking point, sir?
Okay. So in the late 19th century and the first few years of the 20th century, Madras presidency had a infamous reputation. It was called the benighted province. It was called a sleepy hollow. Of course, the comparison was with Bengal. So the British continued to maintain that view of Madras presidency, but things change, and very few people are able to pick the first rumblings, the first stirrings. The report that I referred to of 1906, obviously the British collector was, he didn't have a keen ear to the ground. That is one. The second thing is, always something starts at some point in time. Who is perspicacious enough, keen enough to pick those stirrings? Though this was true in 1905 or 1906, by the beginning of 1907, the Swadeshi movement, which begins as a movement within Bengal on a very specific grievance, that is the partition of Bengal. By about in a year or two, for the first time, Indian nationalism, Indian freedom struggle becomes a two aspects to that. First, it becomes an all India movement. Secondly, it becomes a mass movement. Until that point, all these suit-boot leaders would meet every year during the Christmas holidays and, speak in English, pass resolutions and petition the government. By the Swadeshi movement, it becomes a mass movement. People are on the streets, people are singing songs, public meetings are held. Now we may think, in the 21st century, what is so great about the public meetings? Until the end of the 19th century, public meetings meant in a hall, 50, 100 people would meet. Only during the Swadeshi movement, people met in public places. And they were addressed in what they call the vernacular languages, the Indian languages. They sang songs, they were spoken to, and common people entered the fray. So by 1907, South India also joins the Indian mainstream in terms of nationalist politics. Tuticorin is one epicenter, Madras city is another epicenter, and the other epicenter is in the coastal districts of what is now Andhra Pradesh, Rajahmundry, Nellore, other places. From this, the nationalist movement, the Indian freedom struggle, grows in the subsequent decades with the coming of Mahatma Gandhi, the non-cooperation movement, the civil disobedience movement. So this is the path. And the first explosive movement is the starting of the Swadeshi Company and Chidambaram Pillai's what I may call pyrotechnics. He actually spectacularly changes a quiet place into the hub of Swadeshi activity, and the entire Indian nation turns towards Tuticorin. Aravinda Ghosh is writing about it, Bipin Chandra Pal is commenting about it, Tilak is following what is happening, Lajpat Rai is in correspondence with Chidambaram Pillai. So, South India, the most unlikely southernmost corner, Tuticorin is barely, as the crow flies, it's barely 70, 80, 50, 60 kilometers from the Sri Lankan island. So this is the transformative moment. And Swadeshi Company is the emblem of that transformative. And it is a very heroic moment because the common people come out into the streets, and people who feared, there is a poem by Subramanya Bharati. He said, no, common people used to fear even the postman, because he was dressed in khaki. Now, these people started shouting Vande Mataram at white sahibs, at the Gora sahibs. So this is the empowerment that Chidambaram Pillai enables. And that is
right,
why...
sir. Right, and you mentioned a interesting cast of characters. Just in your answer, you have Subramanyam Bharadiyar, you have VOC, you have G. Subramanyam Iyer, who founded the Hindu and the first Tamil daily. So you have a very interesting set of actors who sort of play a role at the start of the 20th century to sort of light the Swadeshi movement in the South. If you could just go through the main actors, right? And if you could also add what led them to, or what motivated them to take positions with regards to the Swadeshi Steam Company, sir.
Okay. So I want to draw a parallel with the Indian cinema, Bollywood cinema and Kollywood cinema. In Bollywood cinema, you have multi-starrers. In Tamil movies, there are no multi-starrers. There is only one big hero. The same thing happens with the Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company. There is no doubt that this Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company has one big hero, which is V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, and he makes, in typical heroic fashion, he enters this frame suddenly out of the blue when nobody even can imagine that. And he comes with he comes in with a song and a dance, if I may say so. But interestingly, like all Tamil films, it also has very interesting supporting characters. So if Chidambaram Pillai, a small-time pleader lawyer, shoots into, this movement catapults him into national stardom. The Secretary of State for India in London is commenting about Chidambaram Pillai. The Times of London is commenting about Chidambaram. But that said, that even though there's a star, no movie can be made with just one star. It needs to have supporting cast, needs to have a production team. So there are so many other characters, small characters, but nevertheless very important characters. And I consider it, I'm proud that I have brought to life many of these people who have been completely forgotten. When I say completely forgotten, I'm not exaggerating. Their own families have forgotten them. When I went looking for these families, their grandchildren and great grandchildren, they didn't know anything about their grandfathers and great grandfathers. I had to inform them. I had to tell them, your grandfather, this man, he did these things. This is what I found in the archives. Do you know anything? They said they didn't know. I think there's a reason for it. I'll come to it shortly. So, but 3 or 4 figures I want to underline. One is a very important figure, the great nationalist poet Subramania Bharati. He was a poet, he was a journalist, he was living on a salary of 30 rupees. But this man was idealism personified, or you would say, he's an idealist romanticist. He fully believed in this company. And he said, no, this was going to be the harbinger of change. This is going to bring in this transformative moment, which is going to, revolutionize the Indian nationalist movement. One side politics is going on. We will take on the British on their own terrain. And he is passionate in his pleas. But at the same time, as the British, both the British government and the British businessmen, they crush the company, Bharati is shattered. So you find the last days of the company in the Chronicle of Bharati, it will take a completely hard-hearted person not to be moved to tears. He's trying to raise money. He's talking to people. Desperately, he's writing poems. So this is one great figure. So I'm sure readers would be fascinated by this misty-eyed, romantic idealist poet who had no sense of practical matters. Then the other figure is G. Subramania. G. Subramania Iyer has the unique distinction of being the progenitor of 2 nationalist papers, one the Hindu and then the other Tamil newspaper, Swadeshi Movement. Then he was also a very important early Congress leader. On the one hand, he was an economic nationalist. On the other hand, uniquely among his colleagues, he was also a great social reformer. He arranged the remarriage of his widowed daughter in the late 19th century. So this fantastic intellectual was also supporting the movement. At least these 2 names are, known in other contexts. The interesting aspect about this book, and as I said, the reason why I'm proud about writing this book, people, who do not figure in any other narratives. One personality that I would talk about is S.D. Krishna Yar. He was the one, after Vavusi, Vivo Chidambaram Pillai was arrested in March 1908 and sentenced to double life imprisonment for sedition. It was Krishna Yar who steered the company. He somehow tried to keep the company afloat for more than 2 years under the most trying circumstances. There was no money. The police and the government were breathing down the neck of the company. He fights valiantly, but then the company collapses. But the sad thing about Krishna Yar is, I have not been able to find a single photograph of this man. I don't know when he was born. And this man worked for the company without drawing even a single paisa as salary. The only notice I found was of his death in 1926. But this man was such a heroic man that in 1924, when the British government of India set up the Indian Mercantile Marine Committee to look into the problems of India's merchant navy, he gives evidence to that committee, and in that committee, he takes on the members of the government directly and accuses them in the bluntest terms that it was because of the government that the company was crushed. A nationalist enterprise which should have got protection from the state was crushed and killed. So this entire book, I think, teams with these kind of figures, and no movement, no social or political movement, and no nation can thrive and flourish on just one person, however strong that person may be. It is the common people who have to build the nation, and it's the common people who have to be politicized, sensitized, and make country and nation a very inclusive nation.
Right, sir. And that was my final question, to sort of understand the figures, the individuals involved in this story. Thank you so much for joining ThePrint, sir. The Swadeshi Steam is now out. Again, a very fascinating read into individuals like Mr. Venkatachalapati says that you may not find otherwise in other books. Even VOC himself and the entire Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company makes for a very interesting read as to how Indians themselves decided to take on the British Empire at its very peak, its maritime trade and its maritime empire. So thank you once again, Mr. Venkatachalapati, for joining ThePrint, ThePrint softcover. The book is out now, published by Penguin India. Thank you.